Let's take a look at how to draw a realistic hand using a 3-step approach. Here are the steps. First, we're going to draw the basic shapes. Then we're going to draw the contours or the outlines. And then lastly, we're going to add the value, which is also referred to as shading. I'm going to use 2 pencils for this demonstration. The first is an HB pencil. The first thing we need to do is look at the basic shapes. The first shape is a square shape that happens on the back of the hand. We'll draw this shape very loosely using the HB pencil. I'm working on Bristol paper for this demonstration, which provides a nice smooth surface for drawing, but you're welcome to use any surface that you like. The next shape we'll look for is a triangular shape that happens just to the right of the square in this case. Again, we'll draw this shape very loosely using the HB pencil. Now we'll look for more shapes, and in the case of the fingers, these are simply cylinders. Now, this is the trickiest part of figuring out the shapes, but they're relatively easy to draw. I'll start with the forefinger. Again, for each segment of the finger, we're just going to draw a cylinder. Since the finger points away from the viewer a bit, that cylinder will be hidden just a bit, or rather, the next 2 cylinders after the first are slightly hidden. Then we'll move on to the middle finger. Only 2 of the cylinders are visible with the middle finger. Then we'll move on to the next finger. Notice that each one of these cylinders originates from our original square that we drew. And in the case of the pinky, there's just a small bit showing. Then we'll draw the cylinders for the thumb. Notice that it comes out of the bottom of the triangle that we drew. There's only 2 cylinders for the thumb. We can make some alterations to the cylinders so they look more finger-like. We'll draw a couple of lines for the wrist, and these simply come out from the bottom of the square. Now we'll gently erase some of the extra lines that we don't need anymore using a vinyl eraser. Now we'll switch pencils, and I'm using a pencil that's about equivalent to a 4B pencil. We'll use this pencil for the rest of the drawing. We're going to start to define the contour lines now. Contour lines are basically outlines. A lot of times if you start your drawing by just drawing the contour lines, you get distortion or inaccurate shapes when you're trying to draw something. If you start with shapes and then start to add the contour lines, you're more likely to be successful with your overall shape. At this point in the drawing, I don't have to worry about the shape. Instead, I can focus on the lines that exist. I'm going to vary the amount of pressure that I place on the pencil so that some of the lines are slightly thicker than some of the other lines. I want the lines to be thicker in areas of shadow and thinner in areas of highlight. So now that we've got our contour lines in place, let's talk a little bit more about those shadows and highlights. First, you want to consider where the light source is coming from, and this is simply where the light is originating, and in this case, it's coming from the upper left-hand corner. This means that we're going to have highlights predominantly on the left side of the hand. Anything that protrudes will receive light. The opposite of that are shadows. On the opposite side of the hand, in this case the left-hand side of the hand, we're going to have more shadows or darker values. Also, anything that recedes will typically be darker in value or have shadowed areas. Midtones will exist in between these areas of shadow and highlight. Midtones are basically middle values. I'm going to start in an area where I feel comfortable, and as I add the value or develop the shading, I'm going to start with a light application and progressively get darker with my application. Here again, I'm still using the 4B pencil to do so. Some artists suggest that you use a variety of different graphite pencils, but I've found that if you start with a softer pencil, like say a 4B or a 6B, you can simply adjust the amount of pressure that you put on the pencil. This leads to consistency in the graphite drawing. Here's a closer look at how I'm adding the value to the drawing, or the shading. It's a good idea to pay close attention to your photo reference when you're drawing, referring to it for the information regarding the midtones, shadows, and the highlights in the drawing. I'll continue to work my way downward from the finger to the area where the thumb meets the palm. I'm using a circling technique to add the value. This allows me to gradually adjust the pressure and have total control of the value that I'm adding. I'm not going to use any blending tools at all, relying only on the pressure of the pencil to create the gradations of value. You may also notice that I have a paper towel underneath my palm. If you're not careful, your palm can smear the graphite that you've already applied to the surface. Since we obviously don't want this to happen, laying down a piece of paper or a paper towel will prevent the oils from your hand from mixing with the graphite that you've already applied to the surface. Now more about that circling technique. Circling is simply making small, tiny little circles to build up the value. This allows us to create smooth gradations or changes from dark values to light values. Occasionally I will create horizontal or vertical lines, or perhaps even diagonal lines, but the end result is a consistent application of value. As we approach the wrist, there's a bit of texture evident in the photo reference. This is because there are hairs on that part of the arm. For this reason, it will affect the way that we add the value. We can be a little bit more linear with the marks that we make. There are also a few strong lines that exist in this area. We'll go ahead and add them and then layer the value on top. There are subtle areas of value changes that exist on the back of the palm of the hand. We're going to slowly build up the values again in these areas, starting with light applications and progressively get darker. These areas exist up near the knuckles as well. Again, we'll slowly build up the value. It's important not to make any assumptions about what values you feel like you're seeing. Instead, make comparisons with values that you've already applied to the surface and with the area that you're working in at the moment. This will help ensure that you create accurate value. In other words, look at the darker values and compare them to the lighter values. Are your values matching the values that are observed in the photo reference? Work slowly. Take the drawing in small pieces at a time, focusing only in the area that you're working at that moment. A few cross contour lines are evident in the middle finger here. These are basically subtle wrinkles. I'll add these lines as I view them in the photo reference. It's these relationships in value that is going to lead to the illusion of form that we're after in the drawing of the hand. If you get the value right, you're going to do a couple things. One, you'll create a realistic and representational light source. Secondly, you'll create the illusion of form that's necessary. This applies to any drawing that you do. These cross contour lines are evident on the forefinger as well, so I'll add these subtle lines. As you are adding shading to the drawing, be aware that you'll probably want to create a full range of value. This means you'll have the darkest darks and the lightest lights, as well as all of the values that exist in between. I'll add a bit of detail to the ring here. Since it is a shiny object, there'll be high contrast between the dark values and the light values. I can always make adjustments to the values that I've already put down, as comparisons are made throughout the drawing. This is another reason why you don't want to make your values too dark too quickly. It's easier to make a value darker if need be, instead of trying to go back and make changes if you've accidentally made it too dark to begin with. There are subtle changes in value that exist on the back of the hand. We're going to slowly build up these values, just like we have in other areas. We'll put very light pressure on the pencil in these areas. We'll still start in the areas that we feel like are the darkest, like there are a few tendons perhaps in the back of the hand that are clearly visible, so these areas are going to be a little bit darker. As we add the value, we can also think about cross contour lines, which are lines that are not necessarily visible, but they follow the form of the object. If you look closely at the photo reference, you'll be able to notice these lines. So as we add the value, we can make the lines follow those directions. It makes more sense to add the value in this way, and it will also lead to a greater illusion of form. Since I've got a good amount of value on the surface, I see that I need to make a few areas darker. So I'll go back to the area where the thumb meets the hand, because this is the darkest area in the drawing. I'll go back and address the area that's near the wrist. Again, this area needs to be darker as well, so I can push the value a bit further. You can always make an area appear lighter in value by placing darker values around it. That contrast will naturally make the lighter area appear lighter. So for the areas on the back of the hand that are lighter, we'll simply make some of the areas around it just a slight bit darker. This will help create the illusion that these areas are protruding and receiving light. We'll continue to work on some of the subtle changes in value that happen on the back of the hand. Here again, we'll think about cross contour lines as we add the value. We can also go back and add some of the subtle lines that happen right at the wrist. We can also make this area darker, as it's darker in the photo reference. And just as we've done throughout the drawing, we can make adjustments to the value, making areas darker if the need exists. We'll add a very light value on the side that's closest to the light source on the wrist, and we'll make the area of shadow just a bit darker. This will help make the wrist look like it's actually curved. Then we can add those subtle details, like the individual strands of hair that are visible in the photo reference. We'll add these marks with a very light application, making the mark in the same manner that the hair would grow out from the skin. Then we can make final adjustments to the values, pushing values darker if need be. And then our drawing of a hand is complete.